The silent scream, the first cry for help. Ambassador Serenity floated in the crystalline chambers of the Ethereal Collective's communication center, her translucent form shimmering with confusion. For 3,000 years, her people had monitored the galaxy's communications, serving as peaceful mediators between species. They had heard trade negotiations, scientific exchanges, and diplomatic discussions. But never had they received what now pulsed through their quantum receivers, a scream of pure terror that transcended language itself. The message originated from the Kepler 442 system, home to the Luminar civilization. These beings were made of living crystal, their bodies catching and reflecting light in patterns that served as their language. They were artists, philosophers, and dreamers who had spent millennia creating sculptures from starlight itself. They had never known war, never built weapons, never imagined that such darkness could exist in their universe. Serenity's form flickered as she processed the transmission. The Luminar weren't just afraid. They were dying. Something was consuming their worlds, not conquering them, but literally devouring everything they had ever built, ever dreamed, ever been. The Void Swarm awakens. The enemy had no name for itself, because it had no need for identity. It simply was, a collective consciousness of hunger that had drifted between galaxies for eons, searching for civilizations to consume. The entity that other species would come to call the Void Swarm consisted of billions of individual organisms, each the size of a small ship, working together with the efficiency of a single mind. They had found the Luminar worlds by accident, drawn by the unique energy signatures of the crystal beings' art forms. What had begun as curiosity quickly became consumption. The swarm didn't just destroy, it absorbed. Every Luminar consumed became part of the collective. Their knowledge, memories, and essence added to the growing mass of the hive mind. The crystalline cities of Luminar Prime cracked and shattered as the swarm descended. Buildings that had stood for millennia, carved from pure diamond and shaped by songs that could manipulate matter itself, were reduced to dust in moments. The Luminar tried to flee, but their graceful, floating forms were no match for the predatory speed of their attackers. Elder Prism, the oldest of the Luminar, watched his people fall from the central spire of their capital. His crystalline body, which had captured and reflected the light of 3 different suns for over 2,000 years, now flickered with the dim glow of despair. He activated the emergency beacon that had never been used, sending a message that would echo across the galaxy. "We are the Luminar of the Kepler 442 system," his voice resonated through quantum space. "We are beings of light and crystal, creators of beauty, seekers of peace. Something has come to our worlds that devours not just our bodies, but our very essence. We have no weapons, no armies, no knowledge of war. If there is anyone in the darkness between stars who still believes in protecting the innocent, please help us. We are dying, and with us dies 10,000 years of art, music, and dreams. Earth's unlikely." Listeners, the message reached Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station at 0347 hours GMT. Lieutenant Sarah Chen was halfway through her coffee when every screen in the facility lit up with incoming data. She had been monitoring deep space communications for 5 years, listening for signs of intelligent life among the cosmic background radiation. The closest she had ever come to first contact was a pulsar that seemed to beat in mathematical sequences. This was different. The translation algorithms, designed to detect patterns in any potential alien communication, went into overdrive. Within minutes, they had decoded enough of the Luminar language to understand the basic message. It was a distress call. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the red phone that connected directly to the Pentagon. She had dreamed of this moment, her entire career, but she had always imagined first contact would be peaceful, hopeful, a message of greeting from the stars. Instead, it was a cry for help from a dying civilization. "This is Lieutenant Chen at Deep Space Monitoring. I need to speak to General Morrison immediately. We have received a transmission from an extraterrestrial source. They are under attack and requesting assistance." The response was swift. Within an hour, the most powerful military leaders on Earth were gathered in the Situation Room, listening to Elder Prism's translated plea. The room fell silent as the full horror of the situation became clear. Somewhere in the galaxy, an entire civilization was being exterminated, and they had turned to Earth as their last hope. President Amanda Foster looked around the table at her advisors. "What are we looking at in terms of response capability?" General Morrison, a veteran of 3 decades of military service, pulled up holographic displays showing Earth's newest vessels. The Prometheus-class deep space fleet was designed for exploration and potential contact scenarios. "We have 5 ships capable of interstellar travel, each carrying a full complement of Marines trained in zero-gravity combat. But ma'am, we're talking about traveling over 4,000 light-years." "How long would it take?" the president asked. "Using our latest quantum drive technology, approximately 6 weeks. But ma'am, we have no idea what we'd be facing when we get there. These Luminar could be lying, this could be a trap, or we could be flying into a conflict so far beyond our capabilities that we'd just be adding more casualties to the count." Secretary of Defense Robert Hayes leaned forward. "There's also the question of whether we should get involved in alien conflicts at all. We've just achieved interstellar travel. Maybe we should focus on protecting Earth instead of playing galactic police." The president stood and walked to the window, looking out at the capital city below. Somewhere in those streets lived 8 billion humans who had no idea that first contact had just occurred, or that their leaders were deciding whether to risk everything to save strangers they would never meet. "Get me everything we know about these Luminar and this void swarm," she said finally. "I want to know what we're dealing with before I commit our people to a war they might not be able to win." The Prometheus fleet responds. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Earth's leading xenobiologist, had worked around the clock to analyze the Luminar transmissions. What she found both amazed and terrified her. The Luminar were unlike anything in Earth's evolutionary experience. Beings of living crystal who communicated through light patterns and had achieved a level of artistic and philosophical development that humanity could barely comprehend. "They're not just asking for military help," she explained to the assembled leaders. "They're asking someone to preserve what they are. The void swarm doesn't just kill, it assimilates. Every Luminar consumed becomes part of the collective. They're not just dying, they're being erased from existence." The room digested this information in silence. Then Marine Colonel Marcus Rodriguez spoke up. "Ma'am, my people have been training for first contact scenarios for years. We knew that when we finally met aliens, it might not be under ideal circumstances. These Luminar aren't our enemies, they're victims. If we don't help them, who will?" General Morrison nodded slowly. "The colonel's right. Our intelligence suggests that other species in the galaxy have received this distress call and chosen not to respond. If humanity wants to take its place among the stars, this might be our chance to show what we stand for." President Foster made her decision. "Authorize Operation Lighthouse. The Prometheus fleet will deploy to the Kepler 442 system with a full military complement. Our mission is to assess the situation and provide assistance to the Luminar civilization against this void swarm threat." Within 72 hours, 5 of humanity's most advanced warships were loaded with supplies, weapons, and personnel for the longest journey in human history. The lead ship, UES Defiance, carried Captain Michael Torres, a career naval officer who had commanded vessels in Earth's oceans before taking command of humanity's first interstellar warship. As the fleet prepared to jump to quantum speed, Captain Torres addressed his crew. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to make history. We're not just representing Earth today, we're representing the idea that civilized beings should protect each other against monsters. The Luminar have never known war, but they're about to learn that when angels call for help, sometimes devils answer." Journey through the void. The 6-week journey to Kepler 442 gave the human crews time to study everything they could about their destination. The Luminar had continued transmitting even as their worlds fell, providing detailed information about the void swarm's tactics and capabilities. What they learned painted a grim picture. The swarm operated as a single entity with billions of individual components. Each creature was roughly the size of a fighter jet, with crystalline teeth capable of tearing through metal and organic matter alike. They moved in perfect coordination, like cells in a vast organism, and seemed to learn and adapt from every encounter. The Luminar had managed to destroy a few swarm entities in their desperate defense, but for every one killed, 3 more seemed to appear. Worse, the swarm appeared to be using the consumed Luminar knowledge against them, turning their own crystal-shaping abilities into weapons of destruction. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, leader of the Defiance's Marine contingent, reviewed the tactical data with her team. The good news is that these things have never fought humans before. They've adapted to Luminar tactics, but they've never seen Earth military doctrine. The bad news is that there are approximately 50 million of them, and we're bringing 5 ships. Her lieutenant, James Park, looked at the numbers on his display. Sarge, how are we supposed to fight 50 million of anything? Santos smiled grimly. Son, where we come from, being outnumbered isn't a disadvantage. It's target-rich environment. These swarm things have been picking on peaceful artists for months. They're about to learn why Earth spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. First contact with the dying light. The human fleet approached the Kepler 442 system. They were met by a sight that would haunt their dreams for years to come. The once beautiful crystal worlds of the Luminar were dark, their surfaces covered by writhing masses of void swarm entities. The space around the planets teemed with millions of the creatures, forming vast clouds that moved with predatory intelligence. Captain Torres established communication with Elder Prism, who was broadcasting from the last remaining city on Luminar, Prime. The crystal being's light had dimmed to barely a flicker, and his words carried the weight of a civilization watching itself die. "You came," Prism said, his voice filled with wonder even in despair. "We had begun to believe that compassion was extinct in the galaxy, but you are not like us. Your ships carry weapons, your people know conflict. Are you warriors?" "We are human," Torres replied simply. "And humans have a saying, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We're here to do something." Elder Prism's form brightened slightly. "Then there is hope. But you must understand, the swarm is not like any enemy you have faced. It learns, it adapts, it grows stronger with every victory. It has consumed 90% of our people, and with each absorption it becomes more dangerous." "Then we'd better stop it before it gets any stronger," Torres said. "Elder Prism, we're going to need your people to do something they've never done before. We're going to need them to fight." The crystal being's form flickered with confusion. "But we do not know how to fight. We are creators, not destroyers." "Then we'll teach you," Torres replied. "But first, we're going to show the swarm what happens when predators meet apex predators. Humanity didn't climb to the top of the food chain by being peaceful. We did it by being the most dangerous thing on a planet full of dangerous things. As the human fleet took positions around the dying worlds, every person aboard knew they were about to face an enemy, unlike anything Earth had ever produced. But they also knew something the Void Swarm was about to learn the hard way. That when humanity decides to go to war, the universe itself holds its breath. The battle for the Luminar civilization was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Deathworld response, when predators meet. Prey the Void Swarm had never encountered. Resistance quite like what emerged from the human ships. As the UES Defiance and her sister vessels took positions around Luminar Prime, the swarm's collective consciousness registered something new, a species that didn't flee in terror or plead for mercy. Instead, these strange bipedal creatures seemed to be studying the swarm with the cold calculation of fellow predators. Captain Torres stood on the bridge of the Defiance, watching as tactical displays showed the true scope of the enemy. 50 million swarm entities moved in perfect synchronization around the crystal worlds, their dark forms blotting out the light of the system's twin suns. Any sane military commander would have ordered an immediate retreat. Instead, Torres turned to his tactical officer. "Commander Webb, what's our assessment of enemy capabilities?" Commander Sarah Webb had spent her career analyzing threats to Earth's security, but nothing had prepared her for this. "Sir, the swarm entities appear to function as a single organism. They coordinate attacks with precision that suggests instantaneous communication across vast distances. Individual units are approximately 12 meters long, heavily armored, and equipped with what appear to be organic weapon systems. Weaknesses. Their strength is also their weakness, sir. They're so perfectly coordinated that they can't adapt quickly to unexpected tactics. They've been fighting the same type of enemy for months, peaceful, predictable, technologically inferior. They're not prepared for military doctrine that prioritizes aggression and unpredictability. Torres nodded. The swarm had grown complacent, feeding on helpless prey. They were about to learn why Earth's apex predator had conquered an entire planet. All ships, this is Defiance, implement pattern Omega. Show them what humans do when someone threatens the innocent. The Art of Human Warfare Sergeant First Class Maria Santos stood in the drop bay of the Defiance, addressing her Marines as they prepared for the most important mission in human history. Around her, 200 of Earth's finest warriors checked, their weapons and equipment with the practiced efficiency of professionals who knew that their next few hours would determine the fate of an entire species. "Listen up, Marines," Santos called out over the sound of ships preparing for combat. "Down there are millions of creatures that have spent months torturing and consuming an entire civilization. They think they're the top of the food chain. They think nothing in the universe can challenge them. They're about to learn that they're wrong." The Marines responded with a unified "Hoorah!" that echoed through the ship. These were volunteers, every one of them, who had signed up knowing they might never see Earth again. They came from every nation, every background, every walk of life, united by the simple belief that someone had to stand between monsters and innocence. Lieutenant Park, barely 25 years old but already a veteran of 3 planetary conflicts, raised his hand. "Sarge, Intel says these things can absorb knowledge from their victims. What if they learn our tactics?" Santos grinned. "Son, that's what we're counting on. See, these creatures have only fought one type of enemy. Peaceful, predictable, defensive. But humans have been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We've developed tactics for every situation, including fighting enemies that can adapt to our strategies." She activated her tactical display, showing the Marine assault plan. "We're not going to fight them the way they expect. We're going to hit them fast, hard, and from directions they can't predict. And when they adapt to that, we're going to change tactics completely. By the time they figure out what we're doing, the battle will be over." The dropships launched from all 5 human vessels simultaneously, carrying not just Marines but also something the swarm had never encountered: psychological warfare specialists, battlefield engineers, and combat medics who had sworn an oath to preserve life even in the heart of battle. First contact with death. The swarm's first indication that something had changed came when the human ships opened fire. But instead of the random, desperate shooting they had grown accustomed to from dying civilizations, the humans fired with surgical precision. Each shot was calculated to achieve maximum psychological impact while causing minimal collateral damage to the crystalline cities below. The swarm entities that moved to intercept the human fire found themselves facing weapons they had never encountered. Earth's military had spent centuries perfecting the art of killing, and every piece of technology on the human ships reflected that expertise. Plasma cannons designed to punch through starship armor tore through swarm carapaces like paper. Missile systems that could track and destroy dozens of targets simultaneously turned the space around Luminar Prime into a deadly maze of explosions. But the real shock came when the swarm tried to analyze the human attack patterns. Where the Luminar had been predictable and defensive, the humans were aggressive and constantly changing. They used tactics the swarm had never seen: feints, ambushes, coordinated strikes that seemed to serve no tactical purpose until suddenly they did. Captain Torres watched the battle unfold from the Defiance's bridge, his expression calm despite the chaos around him. "Status report, Commander Webb." "Sir, we've destroyed approximately 2,000 swarm entities in the first 15 minutes. They're trying to adapt to our attack patterns, but every time they shift formation, we change tactics. It's like they're fighting an opponent that thinks 3 steps ahead of them." "That's because we are," Torres replied. "These creatures have been apex predators for so long they've forgotten what it's like to be prey. Time to remind them." The human element Elder Prism watched the battle from his crystal spire, his form brightening with something he had almost forgotten: hope. The human ships moved through space like deadly dancers, their weapons creating patterns of destruction that seemed almost artistic in their precision. But it was the small craft that amazed him most. Human Marines were landing on Luminar Prime itself, seeking out survivors and establishing defensive positions in the ruins of crystal cities. These warriors moved with a confidence that the Luminar had never possessed, as if they had been born for this moment. Human Captain Torres, Prism broadcast, "Your people fight with such certainty. Are you not afraid?" Torres's voice came back steady and strong. "Elder Prism, we're terrified. Fear is what keeps us alive in combat. But we've learned to use our fear as a weapon. These swarm creatures have never fought an enemy that was afraid and still chose to fight. They're about to learn what courage really means." The human Marines on the ground were proving that point. Sergeant Santos and her team had found a group of Luminar survivors hiding in the ruins of their art museum, a building that had once housed sculptures made from crystallized starlight. The swarm had been systematically destroying the artworks, not just consuming them but obliterating them completely. "This is what pisses me off," Santos muttered as she set up defensive positions around the survivors. "They're not just killing these people. They're erasing their culture, their history, everything that makes them who they are." The swarm entities approaching their position moved with the mechanical precision that had terrorized the galaxy for eons. But when they met the human defensive line, they encountered something they had never faced. Soldiers who fought not just for survival, but for an idea. The battle was brutal and close quarters. Swarm creatures that could tear through crystal, like tissue paper, found themselves facing humans in powered armor, who hit back with weapons designed to kill the most dangerous predators Earth had ever produced. More importantly, they found themselves facing warriors who refused to break, even when faced with certain death. Lieutenant Park, bleeding from 3 wounds but still fighting, called out to his sergeant, "Sarge, there's too many of them. They're going to overrun us." Santos fired her plasma rifle into the mass of approaching swarm creatures, each shot precise and deadly. "Son, they're not overrunning us, they're walking into a kill zone. Remember what they taught us at Paris Island. Every Marine is a marksman. Every Marine is a killer. Every Marine is a guardian of democracy. Today, we're guardians of more than democracy. Today, we're guardians of civilization itself. The hive mind learns fear." For the first time in its existence, the Void Swarm collective consciousness experienced something it did not understand: uncertainty. The humans fought with a savagery that matched the swarm's own, but they also fought with something the swarm had never encountered: tactical brilliance combined with absolute moral certainty. The swarm had consumed thousands of species across multiple galaxies, absorbing their knowledge and capabilities. But every species it had faced had been prey, evolved from herbivores or filter feeders or peaceful scavengers. The humans were different. They were predators who had spent their entire evolutionary history fighting other predators, and they had become very good at it. The swarm began to adapt, as it always did, but every adaptation was met by a human counter-adaptation. When the swarm learned to predict human missile patterns, the humans switched to energy weapons. When the swarm learned to absorb energy attacks, the humans switched to kinetic weapons. When the swarm learned to defend against kinetic weapons, the humans switched to biological warfare. But the most disturbing thing was what the humans did with their casualties. When swarm entities fell in battle, they were absorbed back into the collective, their knowledge and experience adding to the whole. When humans fell in battle, their comrades fought even harder, as if the death of each individual made the survivors more dangerous rather than less. The swarm's collective consciousness tried to understand this behavior and failed. In its experience, losses weakened a species, made them more likely to surrender or flee. But human losses seemed to strengthen their resolve, as if each death was fuel for their rage. The tide turns. 6 hours into the battle, the impossible began to happen. The Void Swarm, which had never retreated in its existence, began to pull back from human positions. Not because it was being destroyed, it could absorb losses that would cripple any normal force, but because for the first time in its existence, It was facing an enemy that fought with greater savagery than its own. Captain Torres received reports from all human positions. Sir, the swarm is withdrawing from all ground positions. They're consolidating around what appears to be a central command structure on Luminar Prime's northern continent. Torres studied the tactical displays. They're learning, but they're learning the wrong lesson. They think they can defeat us by concentrating their forces. They don't understand that humans specialize in fighting concentrated forces. Elder Prism's form brightened as he watched swarm entities retreating from his city. Captain Torres, is it possible? Are we winning? Elder Prism, we're not winning yet, but we're teaching them something important, that there are still species in this galaxy willing to fight for what's right. Now we need to teach them something else. We need to teach them what happens when predators become prey. Torres opened communications to all human ships. All vessels, this is defiance. The enemy has made their choice. They've concentrated their forces, believing that numbers will give them victory. They're about to learn that when humans go to total war, numbers don't matter. Victory is the only acceptable outcome. The final gambit. The swarm's central command structure was a massive organic fortress that had grown from the bones of a consumed Luminar city. It pulsed with dark energy, and from its depths came the coordinating signals that controlled the entire swarm consciousness. If the humans could damage it, they might be able to disrupt the swarm's perfect coordination. But the fortress was defended by the majority of the swarm's remaining forces, over 40 million entities that surrounded it in a writhing mass of teeth and claws and hunger. Any direct assault would be suicide, which was exactly what made it a perfect target for human military doctrine. Sergeant Santos, Torres called over the comm. I need a volunteer for a mission that has approximately 0 chance of survival. Santos's voice came back immediately. Sir, permission to volunteer my entire unit. We've been looking for a good fight all day. The plan was simple in its audacity. A single human assault team would penetrate the swarm's defensive perimeter and plant a quantum demolition device at the base of the command structure. The explosion would not only destroy the fortress but would also create a quantum resonance cascade that would disrupt the swarm's hive mind across the entire system. It was, by any reasonable assessment, a suicide mission. The team would have to fight through millions of swarm entities, plant the device, and escape before the explosion tore through local space-time. The chances of success were minimal. The chances of survival were non-existent. Every Marine in the human force volunteered. When angels fall, devils rise. The final assault began at dawn on Luminar Prime, though the swarm's presence had blocked out so much sunlight that dawn was barely distinguishable from night. Santos led a team of 50 Marines in a direct assault on the swarm command fortress, while the human fleet provided orbital support that turned the sky into a storm of fire and metal. The Marines fought with a fury that amazed even their enemies. Each human warrior was a product of millions of years of evolution on a planet where only the strongest, smartest, and most aggressive survived. They had been trained by military traditions that stretched back thousands of years, taught by instructors who had learned their craft in the bloodiest conflicts in human history. But more than that, they were fighting for something the swarm could never understand: the idea that innocence deserved protection, that beauty had value, that some things were worth dying for. Sergeant Santos reached the base of the command structure with only 12 Marines left alive. The quantum device was armed and ready, but the swarm had finally learned to concentrate its forces. Millions of entities surrounded the human position, and more were coming every second. This is Santos to all human forces, she broadcast. Device is in position and armed. Estimate 30 seconds to detonation. It's been an honor serving with you all. But before she could trigger the device, something extraordinary happened. The surviving Luminar, inspired by human courage, began to fight back. Elder Prism and hundreds of other crystal beings used their light-shaping abilities to create barriers around the human position, buying precious seconds for the Marines to complete their mission. You have shown us what courage means, Prism, broadcast to the humans. Now let us show you that even the most peaceful people can choose to be brave. The explosion that followed could be seen from orbit. The quantum device detonated with the force of a small star, tearing through the swarm command structure and sending resonance waves throughout the system. Across Luminar Prime and the surrounding worlds, swarm entities suddenly stopped moving, in perfect coordination. For the first time in their existence, they were confused, disoriented, acting as individuals rather than parts of a greater whole. The human fleet pressed their advantage immediately. Ships that had been fighting a defensive battle suddenly went on the attack, targeting the now disorganized swarm entities with ruthless efficiency. Without their hive mind coordination, the swarm was just a collection of dangerous animals, and humans had spent 10,000 years learning how to hunt dangerous animals. The galaxy learns a new truth. The battle for Luminar Prime lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the void swarm was gone, not destroyed completely but broken and scattered, their hive mind consciousness shattered by the quantum resonance cascade. The surviving entities fled into deep space, no longer a coordinated threat but individual creatures seeking only to survive. Elder Prism found Captain Torres in the ruins of Luminar Prime's capital city. The human commander was wounded but alive, directing rescue operations with the same efficiency he had shown in battle. "Captain Torres," Prism said, his crystal form bright with gratitude, "we owe you more than our lives. You have taught us that there is still courage in the galaxy, still species willing to stand against the darkness." Torres looked out over the Crystal City, where human marines were working alongside Luminar survivors to rebuild what had been destroyed. "Elder Prism, you don't owe us anything. We did what any decent species should do when they see innocence threatened. The real question is what happens now." Word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy at faster than light speeds. The ethereal collective, who had listened to the Luminar's desperate plea with sympathy but no action, now broadcasted news of humanity's intervention to every corner of civilized space. The galaxy learned that there was a new species among the stars, one that had traveled thousands of light years to save strangers, one that had faced impossible odds and won through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. But they also learned something else. They learned that humans were dangerous in ways that even the Void Swarm had never been. The swarm destroyed out of hunger, consumed out of instinct. Humans could be far more terrifying because they destroyed out of choice, and they were very good at making that choice quickly and decisively, the price of being human. The cost of victory was measured not just in lives lost, but in innocence destroyed. The Marines who returned to Earth were no longer the same people who had left. They had seen things that would haunt their dreams forever, done things that would change them in ways both subtle and profound. Sergeant Santos survived the final battle, one of only 3 Marines from her unit to make it home. She stood in the Pentagon briefing room, delivering her after-action report to the same leaders who had authorized the mission months earlier. "The Luminar are safe for now," she reported. "The swarm is scattered and no longer poses a coordinated threat. But, ma'am, we need to understand something. What we did out there, what we proved we could do, it's going to change everything. The galaxy now knows that humans are willing to fight, and more importantly, they know that we're very good at it." President Foster nodded gravely. "Sergeant, are you saying we've made enemies?" "No, ma'am," Santos replied. "I'm saying we've made everyone else very, very careful about how they treat us. Some species will want to be our allies because they've seen what we can do for our friends. Others will want to be our enemies because they've seen what we can do to our enemies. But none of them will ever again make the mistake of thinking, we're just another peaceful species exploring the stars." The rescue of the Luminar had announced humanity's arrival on the galactic stage in the most dramatic way possible. Earth was no longer an isolated world on the edge of the galaxy. It was the home of the species that had done the impossible, that had faced the unstoppable and stopped it. But as the human fleet returned to Earth, carrying the grateful thanks of the Luminar and the wary respect of a dozen other species, one truth had become clear to everyone in the galaxy. When angels called for help, devils had answered, and those devils wore the uniform of humanity, carried the flag of Earth, and had proven that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the universe was someone willing to fight for what was right. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would humanity. They had set out to save strangers and discovered that in doing so, they had defined themselves not just as another species among the stars, but as the guardians of a principle that they would carry wherever they went. That innocence deserved protection, that evil deserved opposition, and that sometimes the only thing standing between monsters and victims was the willingness to become a monster yourself. Earth had sent its deadliest beings to answer an alien's prayer. The galaxy was still trying to decide whether that was salvation or a new kind of threat entirely.